Let's imagine a world of AI in 2025, when we have AI-powered thermostats optimized with home temperature. It's really brilliant, isn't it? And also we have other great innovations that big tech companies does. For example, Red Hat. We have some good use cases around AI to help with prevention of veteran suicide with our technologies. It's 2025, right? In the same year, if you recognize the date, it's 2025. A single default password exposes access to dozens of apartment buildings. Welcome to today's talk. So this is actually exactly the intention of the EU Cyber Resilience Act, which I'm going to talk about today. Welcome. Good afternoon. I'm happy to see people still keen to learn something even in the afternoon. My name is Roman, and I do open source security at Red Hat. And today's talk is about how to stay compliant and, the most important, take benefits from the EU Cyber Resilience Act. I want to start with a disclaimer that CRA is the most complex regulation that's presumably ever done for the software and the open source industry. This is not a legal advice, right? And we're expressing our opinions as the community and as the experts heavily engaged in the different CRA efforts. But hopefully that would be helpful. At this event, Open Source Summit North America, you can learn more about CRA. Yesterday, I gave a talk specifically to maintainers and contributors, how to handle CRA. Today's talk will be mostly about basics and compliance, and mostly aimed to manufacturers and stewards. Also, and you can check the recording, I believe. Also, at this summit, there was a brilliant session, live education by the about CRA. Probably you can also check out the recording afterwards. So let's take it away. This is from the European Commission official publications, from baby monitors to smartwatches to those smart locks and everything. The products and software that contain digital components are in our lives, right? And there are security risks, as we could imagine. And me, as a security nerd, of course, I'm well aware about that, but probably not everybody pays attention to this, specifically manufacturers and distributors of these products. So that's got recognized by European Commission as well. That's why Cyber Resilience Act, or CRA, comes to play, and this is a European Union regulation actually applicable to all who operates in the European Union, and it makes it a big deal for software specifically and for open source, because those often don't have any boundaries and everything, right? If you somehow interact with the EU customers, consumers, or people, you're potentially in scope. So CRA is the regulation that aims to safeguard consumers and businesses buying or using so-called products with digital elements. And there are two variants of acronym for it, PDE or PWD. With the introduction of mandatory cybersecurity requirements, mainly for manufacturers throughout entire product lifecycle. And its supply chain, including third parties and apparently open source dependencies. And this is the nice picture, again, from the European Commission to kind of demonstrate the intention of the CRA. Maybe not the best one, but everybody likes it anyway. The first important question would be, what's in scope? And there are a couple of examples. In scope of the EU Cyber Resilience Act, things like smart home, operating systems, web browsers, password managers, and along other 19 classes of products that collectively comprise the so-called importance class 1 of the products. They are definitely in scope of Cyber Resilience Act. Now, importance class 2 and 4 types, for example, firewalls, tamper-resistant CPUs, hypervisors, they are definitely in scope. Now, the critical class, hardware devices with security boxes, smart meter gateways, for example, so they are in scope. But apparently, everything else is also in scope, all other consumer devices and everything else, and actually all software, because they contain digital elements. Those are considered as the product with digital elements. And open source software is also in scope. There is a little caveat to this, but still. So, and this would be the rest 90% of the products that would be unclassified, but still in scope of the regulation. That is very important because later on I will tell you about the standards and requirements that are slightly different for these types of products. What is out of scope? We still have something out of scope. Products that's covered by other regulations or directives, for example, automotive, medical, aviation is generally out of scope because they're covered under other European regulations. Products designed for national security or processing classified information, which kind of makes sense. Pure websites are also out of scope. Software as a service also out of scope, but with a small caveat if they're not essential for normal functionality of the actual product that they may be attached to, right? Otherwise, services out of scope also. And I also need to mention that there are still debates within the expert groups and the European Commission about so-called remote data processing definition and how to distinguish services from products and whether or not they are in scope. Free and open source software, if it is not used in course of commercial activity, is also out of scope, which kind of good news. And we can conclude the talk, right? Because we're at Open Source Summit and it's not in scope, but the devil is in the details. Yeah, that's the one. It's very important to highlight the important open source software roles in CRA in general, the roles of different players that are mentioned in the regulation. Manufacturers, they're actual producers of products, the companies that does products, right? Importer and distributor, there are resellers or distribute products with digital elements. Now, open source contributors or developers, open source maintainers, and the new role that actually we didn't see in previous regulations at all in any format is open source software steward. That means to be systematically support open source software projects. You can think about Linux Foundation or Python Software Foundation or Eclipse or Apache and so on and so forth. So that probably would be open source stewards. Some of the good news, that's not for all of us, right? That's the most of obligations are for manufacturers, and they're designed to be for manufacturers. For importers and distributors, we still have some obligations, but they're mainly around making sure that manufacturers do a great job. They provide a declaration of conformity, CE mark, and so on and so forth, so that distributors can, assess that everything is okay. Open source contributors and developers, they are entirely out of scope. Open source maintainers, they also kind of out of scope if they don't monetize projects, which is also good news. And open source stewards, that's an interesting entity under CRA because it's not a mandatory entity. So that's kind of voluntary self-nominatory role. And most open source projects will not have steward anyway. Okay, now going to another another wording of the European Commission. What's the, again, intention, right, of the CRA? They use CRA would see inadequate security features become a thing of the past with the introduction of mandatory cybersecurity requirements, as I mentioned, mainly for manufacturers and retailers of such projects, which again kind of makes sense. I don't want my children to play with the with a digital toy which has the vulnerabilities, right? For example. Now, another critical point or important point of the CRA that actually it would incentivize to push in security fixes to the very left. The whole regulation actually promotes reporting and pushing those fixes to the maintainers in case of open source projects, for example, as opposed to be manufacturer fixing something that they don't own, right? Which is absolutely good thing. Now, going down a little bit deeper to requirements for manufacturers, I would say there are a lot of requirements, but I tried to summarize them briefly. There's still a lot on the slides, but tried to summarize them briefly for our understanding. Security by design and by default, including secure configuration. Remember those default passwords, right? That's should not be the case anyway, but it's still. Requirements around risk management, like a general risk management for organizations, data and communication protection, which again kind of makes sense, and I hope most of the responsible manufacturers do these things, but apparently not everybody. Clear documentation, including security documentation, right? Vulnerability management requirements. Now that is a requirement to report actively exploited vulnerabilities and severe incidents to the EU officials in the first 24 hours, and then subsequent more detailed reports in 72 hours, and then in 14 days. Also, there is a due diligence requirements for manufacturer to assess third parties, including, of course, open source dependencies, and produce SBOMs. Another important requirement that really makes sense is around dissemination of security updates without delay and free of charge. Now, for those of us who are in security field, can think, okay, probably those all requirements actually make sense, right? Because we kind of, in security, we used to push these requirements in our organizations. For example, risk management standards. Some of us are following these well-known and well-established standards, specifically ISO 27005, and I also refer here to ETSI standard, because this is common understanding within the EU that these two would be the main influence points for the standards that's been developed right now to implement this, to clarify the CRA requirements. SDLC frameworks like maturity models, NIST, SSDF, which has been referred multiple times here at the conference, other frameworks, threat modeling is a good idea to fulfill requirements on the left. Coordinated vulnerability disclosure program that also should be done by all manufacturers, and probably most of us already following this. User guidance on secure usage of products and updates, and of course, a lot of us are running our favorite SBOM tools, right, to produce SBOMs already, which again all kind of makes sense. Probably what's new here is manufacturers should retain updates and documentation and evidences and SBOMs for 10 years after the latest release of the product, which kind of the heavy requirements, and it is still not clear, and there is no agreement what would be what that means, the release, whether we need to retain the documentation for each minor release or only for major releases. But it's important to understand that obligations, they don't end when you end of life your project or product, okay? They will be with you for a subsequent 10 years. Now, what's really new under CRA for software, at least, this conformity assessment and CE mark. Remember, I mentioned these different classes of products on purpose because there are slightly different requirements how you're going to perform conformity assessments. Conformity assessment is basically assessment of how you implement the CRA requirements and basically attestation. For important class 1 products, that's going to be allowed the self-assessment following harmonized standards. Bear with me, I will explain what that means, harmonized standards. For those important class 2, they would require third-party assessments, again following harmonized standards. That means you can do it on your own, so you need to hire somebody externally approved for this kind of work to do this assessment for you. For critical products, there's going to be requirements of third-party assessment following EUCC, which stands for EU Common Criteria, which is variation of US Common Criteria, but that's what's going to be used for third-party assessment for critical products. Now, for the default category, the good news is that self-assessment is enough, and it is enough to follow essential requirements that are captured in the body of the CRA. But the problem is that the requirements that I just showed you on the previous page, they are not clear so far. But in order to justify or to show that you are compliant with CRA, you can use whatever framework you think is sufficient and you think is enough to, to show that you fulfill essential requirements that's written in the text. That's good news because, as I shown in the previous slides, the most of the well-established ISO or otherwise frameworks that theoretically should cover almost all the CRA requirements anyway. Now, this CE mark. If you're buying the physical products like mobile phone or toy or something else, you can notice this CE mark on it that basically attests that this product passed the certain quality controls and maybe safety controls dependent on the type of the products. And the CRA introduces this CE marking for PDEs, for products with digital elements. And brilliant thing is, it's also applicable for software. Okay, all of us, we're still trying to figure out how to affix CE mark to the software, so it's nice and cozy. But yeah, it's still unclear so far. We're trying to figure that out. Now, for these three, right, for harmonized standards and UCC, there still will be the clarified CRA requirements that, as I mentioned, are under development right now. And yes, you could ask the question, where can I find the exact requirements? Because it sounds like in the text of regulation itself, it's a little bit blurry and unclear. And that brings us to the standards. EU is developing standards in order to help with the implementation of the CRA, and this is all complicated. I will try to simplify as much as I can. On the very top, these three parts, there are so-called horizontal standards that would be applicable horizontally no matter of type of the products, and there are basically three of them. Essential requirements, vulnerability handling, and the framework. And they are all under development by EU standardization bodies which we as a community and we as experts try to influence and try to bring more sense into these standards in order to be more like industry adopted standards, not like something brand new. Now that will be vertical standards, the kind of bottom part of the diagram, which primarily will be for the classified products. Remember these classes, right? Importance, critical. So that's why for each of these vertical, for example, operating systems or browsers or firewalls, that's going to be the separate vertical standards. That would give so-called presumption of conformity. Meaning, if you're following these vertical standards, you're compliant for your type of the product, right? And that goes back to my previous slide about how to assess and how to give an evidence that you are compliant with CRA, or how to pass third-party certification. Idea is, if you're following standards, especially if you're classified projects under vertical, if you're following standards, you're going to be compliant. So that's a framework for passing conformity assessment. Now that brings us to stewards a little bit from manufacturers, because I mentioned that stewards is a new role under the CRA, and it's going to be somewhat of the important role because a lot of open source projects kind of may need to have guidance how to do security properly and etc. There are no strict requirements for stewards, and regulator calls them light touch regulatory regime, because there will not be penalties for stewards, and also there is no obligation for foundation or for somebody else to become a steward. Okay, but if you decide to be a steward, there are certain requirements. For example, document security policy for projects that's under your stewardship, foster security development practices for these projects, produce some of the guides regarding vulnerability management, and report severe incidents. And also, as a steward, you would need to cooperate with EU officials. First of all, so-called market surveillance authorities that would be nominated per each EU member state. Again, there is not clear what cooperation actually means, but this is how it's written. And you need to report to other officials. For example, ENISA, this is European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, that would handle this database of the exploited vulnerabilities and severe incidents, so the stewards would need to report to them. And also, there are some words about voluntary attestation program that I will go in a couple of moments. Now, to fulfill these requirements, or to be compliant, quote-unquote, for these requirements, also there are good practices that stewards could follow. On my previous talk, I actually clarified a little bit what tools could be used. But this is kind of sneak peek of the good practices and recommendations for stewards. It's probably a good idea to publish information like coordinated vulnerability disclosure and SDLC process, secure development lifecycle process, into the respectively security MD and contributing MD files to the each repo under stewardship. Right. It's also good practice to do security self-assessment that is widely recommended and sometimes enforced by CNCF for their projects. That's really good practice. It's good practice to use native tools of your hosting tool like GitHub advisories, for example. Scans all of these default security settings. Education, I think, is going to be a good help from stewards to projects. security baseline, OpenSF scorecards, all of these brilliant tools that we are talking at this conference and will be talking tomorrow at the OpenSF Community Day. Please come along to learn more how all of these tools can help. And watch recording of my talk yesterday if you did not attend. I also brought some examples how they can help specifically with CRA. Now, I would like to repeat this slide for those who didn't attend yesterday, because I think this is very important to clarify. I personally still receive a lot of questions about that. Okay, I'm a contributor to the project. What should I know? How am I affected by CRA? But if you're a contributor, you shouldn't be worried about that. If you read this little flowchart from left to right, you should ask yourself the question: if you contribute to the project that you don't maintain, just contribute, the down arrow, CRA is not applicable to you. Now, the second one, even if you're a maintainer and don't take money for anything, you're not affected. Now, if you're a maintainer and accept donations that cover actual cost of the development or the hosting or whatever, you're also not affected. If you're a maintainer of the project and charge for anything else, for example, paid support or sell something on top of it, CRA may be applicable to you, right? But yeah, just to make sure, if you're a contributor, don't worry, please continue your contributions. The timeline. I think this is very important also. The very common question, when I should feel this pain, right? This is the overall timeline. It all started like a few years ago, but officially CRA is already in force as of December 2024. On this diagram, I think I would like to highlight these two important dates. 11 September 2026, there's going to be reporting obligations for vulnerabilities, right? For vulnerability reporting in place, so that as a manufacturer, you have to report in these certain timelines that I explained a little bit earlier. And in 2027, the other points of the regulation will be in full force. So it sounds like we still have time to be prepared, but on the other hand, we don't have that much time, right? Because we need to start now. Now, manufacturers continue to do their good job, right? If you remember, I shared all of these standards that hopefully a lot of companies already followed, like ISO 27000 and etc. SSDF. Contributors are not affected. Good news. Stewards will help maintainers and all of these projects. Probably also good news. What's the catch? Everything sounds like a bright beach and a cocktail and music and everything. Everybody's already doing a good job and everybody will help each other, and some of us are not affected. But the devil is in details, right? First of all, open source maintainers owe you nothing. The brilliant phrase coined by Mike McQuaid, which is kind of cool. And the second point is, with this cheese picture, we need to actually think a little bit more about this picture, because in theory, manufacturers are encouraged to provide fixes to open source developers or to original maintainers of the projects, which of course is a good idea. Also, it sounds like manufacturers are encouraged to support stewards, right, of the open source projects by giving resources or giving money or otherwise support them, so that stewards can help maintainers to keep up with the good security practices. The question is, what manufacturers actually have in return, right? Why they should do all of these things? And I will give answer a little bit later. So let's leave it in there right now. A small kind of injection of why we're talking about CRA specifically on behalf of Red Hat, right? Because we are, as an open source first company, occupies kind of the weird place in this CRA because we hold almost all of the roles under the regulation. We are certainly a manufacturer because we sell stuff. We are potential open source steward, especially for those important projects that we are fostering and help to maintain, to grow, and etc. And tons of Red Hatters, contributors and maintainers to enormous amount of open source projects, right? So we're kind of in the middle of the storm here anyway. And yes, we also will stay compliant, and also we will take benefits from the CRA. Now you're not alone on this journey, and not only kind of Red Hat can help you, but others also. For example, these beautiful guys, like orcs and these crawfish. If you want to take some stickers, you can come after the presentation. But how we as a community can help? One example is we are, along with other experts and companies and supporters, work under so-called ORC working group. That's why these green guys comes to play. ORC stands for Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group, ORC. Okay. What this group is doing a few beautiful, brilliant things. We provide awareness and guidance in terms of CRA, producing FAQ and white papers. We do inventory of the existing resources, standards, and frameworks to also help all of us to navigate the CRA and what's the good practices can help us right now and in the future as we going into this journey. Also, this group aims to produce specifications and best practices that would be free and concise guidance for open source software, which is critically important because some of the standards that I mentioned previously, unfortunately, they are going to be behind the paywall, as they usually are, right? For manufacturers, it's probably be doable to get an access to these standards, but for open source community, it could be a problem. Also, it's very important to produce the clear and concise guidance that could be connected to the standards, but in the more like in the simplified manner, so that it's understood and actionable in reality by open source projects, as opposed to be the standards of 100 pages, right? So that's what we do. Scan QR code, join us. We want to hear voices, we want to hear questions, because otherwise those regulators are not aware of the problems or questions that we have. One of the other examples and good stuff that we do under ORC working group, that's rather complicated diagram. Don't try to to kind of really dive into it. By the way, it's all on the GitHub by the QR code and the link that is shared. You can go ahead and join. Why I show you? Because remember this flow, right? Manufacturers would give fixes to open source projects and maintainers subsequently. And stewards that are up on the left on the diagram would support these open source projects. But in return, that is an expectation that either stewards or open source projects themselves would somehow produce security attestation or, if you wish, declaration of conformity for respective open source projects, which then can be consumed by manufacturers and consumers in order to as an evidence of compliance to CRA, okay? And that actually is a big deal and a big incentive for manufacturers to support more open source projects and stewards, so that they can expect to take something back, right? To make sure that the third parties, in the form of open source projects that they consume, have this confirmation of CRA compliance, if you wish. And this notion is actually explicitly supported by CRA text itself in Article 25 as a voluntary security attestation. I personally think that's going to be a really big deal and a really big incentive to actually get all of these players on this picture of the CRA together and collectively work on the improving security posture of open source projects, and then subsequently of the products themselves that we then all as a users consume from the market. A couple of other examples just to give a sneak peek. As I mentioned, I gave more examples and details at yesterday's talk, but one of the other brilliant work that is done in this case under OpenSSF is Security Insights. This is the project under OpenSSF that basically would give the YAML file as a specification to demonstrate that open source project is following certain security practices. I brought this simple example. This is Keycloak, the real project, right, under CNCF, probably the most popular open source SSO and identity management solution, right? And it produces the Security Insights YAML like this. You can check it out. I mean, it's all open source. And for example, in this file, you can see that this project implemented Sneak and CodeQL as the scans. And actually, they have way more security practices that they demonstrate in this file. The idea is that that would be the machine-readable and also quite a human-readable format, so that all the consumers and manufacturers can then take this file and be sure that the project is following the good practices. And that could serve potentially as the declaration of conformity or that voluntary attestation that I showed in the previous slide that could have been given back to the manufacturers, okay? So that's to kind of, again, that would incentivize all of the players of the ecosystem to come together to work on improving security posture, the real security posture of the projects, as opposed to like do compliance checks. And that's all the good work that is done by under Global Cyber Policy Working Group. And this working group is hosted under OpenSSF, and we do a lot of stuff here as well, like CRA clarifications, blog posts, workshops, checklists and guidelines, awareness education programs, and the one part that I'm particularly excited about is liaisons to tooling, like I showed previously, Security Insights or OpenSSF scorecards or other tools that could help with the both improving security posture and fulfilling the CRA requirements. Again, requirements, quote unquote, because there are no kind of requirements for open source project, but still to make sure that they're following the CRA kind of line. Please come and join us because we need your help, we need your voices, we need your questions, we need your opinions, and also we need your contributions as well. Now, the one important thing that's also I would like to mention and encourage you to take this free class. It's actually entirely free, Understanding the EU Cyber Resilience Act. a lot of us contributors, we worked to compile this class together, and this is a good chance to have a basic understanding under CRA. And the bonus is you are going to get this Credly badge that you can post on LinkedIn, which is kind of cool. I really encourage you to take this class and spread the word to everybody else who is unfamiliar with CRA to understand the basics. So that's really, really a good one. Now, why CRA is good, right? I kind of gave a sneak peek and a couple of hints why CRA is actually good, because it's all for improving security posture. And I kind of formulated this notion because as I speak within the open source community and with my security peers, this is the common understanding that CRA has a potential to make more for supply chain security and for overall security of open source ecosystem and its health at scale in just a few years. Then we are security nerds, right? Security experts trying to pursue to the developers and maintainers and so on. So the CRA has good intention, and if we apply it wisely, we can actually take a lot of benefits out of it. And as the experts in these working groups, and as an experts within the EU standardization bodies and other authorities, we're trying to push this notion forward to everybody to say, hey, we wanted to do meaningful things, we wanted to do practical things, and we wanted to advocate for the industry so that we will not end up with the standards that doesn't make sense, that are not practical or not actionable, but rather that are helpful to make our projects better and our products better. So that's why I think CRA actually is a good thing. We just need to speak more about that and have more voices around it. Takeaways: how to stay compliant and take benefits of the Cyber Resilience Act. That was the name of the talk. To stay compliant, start now. Start making your products with digital elements inventory now, because otherwise you never know what is actually happening. And for your projects as well, it's generally would be a good inventory activity and potentially a good cleanup activity. Cleanup is always a best friend of security, to be honest. Second, join industry efforts. We need your expertise, we need your voice, we need your questions, right? And that could help us to improve Cyber Resilience Act. I have a lot of examples how actually the industry voice already improved Cyber Resilience Act. So come to us, let's give it more voices. Now take benefits out of it. Take it as a call for improving quality and security posture for your products and for your projects. I think it's especially important for kind of security teams and people who care about security to use it as additional leverage. And finally, consider it as a closing gap between ecosystem partners or between your company and your partners and your customers to say, hey, now this is a great chance to come and talk together, right? Remember this diagram when actually there are a few hidden incentives, how manufacturers would really need to talk more or to support more open source projects, but then open source projects would really work on their security posture and then to give this conformity assessment back to the manufacturers. So everybody is happy, right? The bright world ahead of us. So on this positive tone, I wanted to conclude my talk. Thank you. I think we may have time for 1 or 2 questions, and then yeah, the first one, the gentleman in the red t-shirt. can just throw it out.
My understanding is that the December 2027 date, the EU has decided not to grandfather in products. So you're either compliant or you take things off the market. Is that a correct understanding?
This is correct understanding with a small clarification. Actually, CRA is already in force. The thing is that they're not chasing you is kind of the good thing. Because, for example, vulnerability reporting requirements will be enforced in 2026 already, right? But you are right. So you can either take your projects out of the European market or to be compliant, yeah. Yes, that's a perfect question. That is not 100% clear now, but we are working right at this moment on the clarification that would be issued by European Commission on the types of the open source projects and of the different models, of the different monetization models of these open source projects and of the different development models. Like you mentioned, a lot of projects that just live on donations, right? And as I mentioned, the general understanding is if you donate, you're okay. I mean, because the course of commercial activity should have some, some revenue out of it. And the mere fact that you support open source project with money is not itself probably considered as the consistent support that is written in the regulation. So in order to be liable, you need to provide the consistent support, which is, which like giving money alone is not considered as the support of the development of the project or the infrastructure under these projects. So you probably should be okay, but as I mentioned, we are working on on this clarification right in this moment. Should be clear in future. Yeah, you can go next. Yeah, that's the perfect catch. Actually, that's one of the problems that we also constantly highlight is the experts on these committees. There's a little room between the standards published and the actual regulations to be enforced. Regulators formally answer that the CRA is here. You can actually already follow the text and try to excerpt something out of it. But you're completely right. That's why we are gathering together in these working groups. And actually, we are publishing some of the early summaries of what's coming, right? If you join our working groups, you can find FAQs, you can find some of the guidance that we already produced, both for manufacturers and for open source stewards, and actually for open source projects as well, that are, for example, derived from the current early drafts of the standards, so that you have the somehow understanding on what's coming. So that's probably the best that we can do right now. Yes, gentlemen. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, this is, I'm aware that's been a practice for some other regulation, but I don't know what would happen with this, with the CRA, quite obviously, because there are other somehow connected regulations already enforced in the European Union. For example, RED Delegated Act, which for security requirements for radio equipment, and this CRA is actually meant to replace RED gradually. And because of the fact that RED is already in force, and actually in this summer that would be like finally enforced, that could be tricky to then delay CRA, but it's not impossible. So it's, yeah. Yeah, probably the last question, and we need to release the crowd.
Enforcement, I understand, comes through draft compliance secret-based fines. Right? How are those fines structured?
Yeah, the question was about how fines are structured when enforcement comes to play. I don't know about you know about the exact structure. It's also connected to the general European framework that's called NLF, New Legislative Framework. They're put in together. But I do know that those fines or those enforcements will go from market surveillance authorities, MSAs. Actually, there are no MSAs in some countries, so it's still also in flight or in flux how they're going to develop these authorities. But the expectation is that then these authorities would analyze the market, and they would come to you and start ask questions. Also, there will be so-called NSBs, notified bodies, that will carry or provide third-party assessment. And my understanding is that those authorities together would provide the additional clarity, at least in these countries that they operate. But yeah, I think this is still unclear. If we have a look at the historical applications of regulations in the European Union, for example, GDPR, right? In each country, it applied slightly different. And even though the fines are, or at least range for fines is defined, each country applies it slightly different. So it would be dependent on the products, on the country when you actually sell your products in. So perhaps it somehow answers your question, but yeah, we'll find that more. All right, thank you very much.